Welcome to Life Stories, where we share unforgettable tales that inspire, move, and remind us of the power of love, resilience, and justice. Today's story follows actor Chris Mitchell and his loyal co-star, Buddy the Pit Bull, on a harrowing journey through danger and determination. What began as a peaceful walk turned into a fight for survival when a cruel act of violence put Buddy's life at risk. Stay with us as we unfold a gripping tale of courage, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. Subscribe to Life Stories to follow today's adventure. The streets of Brooklyn Heights were alive with the usual buzz of activity. Vendors called out to passers-by, advertising their wares, while the scent of roasted coffee and freshly baked bagels lingered in the air. It was a classic New York afternoon. But for Chris Mitchell, it was a rare moment of respite. Filming for his latest movie had been grueling, and the opportunity to step away from the cameras was a welcome change. Today, though, it wasn't just about him. He had a new companion by his side, Buddy, the pit bull co-star who had been stealing hearts on set. Chris had taken an immediate liking to Buddy. There was something endearing about the dog's wide, expressive eyes and the way his wagging tail seemed to bring life to even the dullest of moments. He figured the walk would not only give Buddy some much-needed fresh air but also allow them to bond further, an essential element for their on-screen chemistry. The dog keeper had hesitated when Chris offered to take Buddy out. "He's a sweetheart, but he can be a handful sometimes," the man had warned, holding out a sturdy leash and a collapsible water container. Chris only smiled and replied, "I think I can handle it." It was something he genuinely believed. After all, how hard could it be to manage one dog? Buddy, for his part, seemed thrilled. His tail wagged furiously as they set off, weaving through the bustling streets. Chris chuckled, watching the dog's excitement as they passed storefronts and street performers. Every now and then, people would stop to admire Buddy, offering compliments on what a handsome dog he was. Chris graciously accepted the praise, feeling a swell of pride for a dog that, although not technically his, felt like family. As they turned a corner, Chris noticed a weathered sign above a door that read Steel Haven. The sound of revving motorcycles and bursts of laughter filtered through the open entrance, immediately drawing his attention. The bar exuded an unmistakable air of defiance, its exterior marked by years of wear and tear. Rows of motorcycles lined the sidewalk like guards, their chrome details glinting under the sun. Chris hesitated, his hand instinctively tightening on Buddy's leash. Something about the place felt off. Still, he spotted a public water fountain near the bar, and Buddy's panting reminded him of the dog's growing need for a drink. Chris guided him toward the fountain, kneeling down to fill the collapsible bowl with water. Buddy drank eagerly, his tongue lapping up the cool liquid. Chris smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction at having provided some relief for his new friend. It was then that Chris noticed a group of bikers lounging outside the bar. Their leather jackets bore matching insignias of snarling tigers, and their expressions ranged from smug to outright intimidating. For a moment, their eyes met his. One of them, a hulking man with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos, gave Chris a slow, appraising look before smirking and turning away. Chris felt a twinge of unease but pushed it aside. He wasn't here to make trouble, and Buddy's safety was his top priority. Just as they were about to leave, a waitress emerged from the bar, her expression taut with frustration. She confronted the bikers, her voice sharp and unwavering. "I told you yesterday," she said, her words carrying across the street. "Your gang's not welcome here anymore. After what happened last time, the boss was clear, you're banned." The bikers erupted in laughter, their arrogance palpable. The man with the shaved head stepped forward, towering over the waitress. "Move aside, sweetheart," he growled, his voice laced with menace. "Or we'll move you ourselves." Chris tensed, his instincts screaming at him to intervene. But he glanced down at Buddy, who was now tugging at the leash, clearly unsettled by the rising tension. He couldn't risk putting the dog in harm's way. Before he could decide what to do, a group of other bikers emerged from the bar, positioning themselves protectively around the waitress. Their presence diffused the situation, and the aggressors reluctantly backed down, though their glares promised the matter was far from over. Chris took this as his cue to leave. He guided Buddy away from the bar, his pace quickening as he put distance between them and the scene. His heart was pounding, not from fear but from the realization that he had narrowly avoided a volatile situation. As they walked, Buddy glanced up at him, as if sensing his unease. Chris reached down and gave the dog a reassuring pat. "It's okay, boy," he murmured. "We're fine." But even as they moved into quieter streets, the events at Steel Haven lingered in Chris's mind. The bikers' aggression, the waitress's courage, and the unsettling sense that something was brewing, it all felt like a storm waiting to break. He couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful walk had just taken a dangerous turn. And the day was far from over. After leaving the tense scene at Steel Haven, Chris and Buddy wandered into a quieter part of Brooklyn Heights. The chaos of the biker bar seemed miles away as they strolled through shaded streets lined with trees and old brownstones. Chris felt himself relax slightly, his grip on Buddy's leash loosening. The dog seemed calmer too, his tail wagging again as he sniffed at the base of lampposts and bushes. Soon, they arrived at a charming cafe with outdoor seating, aptly named Buddy Brew. The patio looked inviting, with its wrought iron tables and string lights draped overhead. It seemed like the perfect place to pause, grab a coffee, and let Buddy rest in the shade. Chris secured Buddy's leash to a table leg and took a seat. Pulling out a script from his jacket pocket, he glanced down at the dog, who had settled beside him, his head resting on his paws. A waitress approached, her name tag identifying her as Maggie. She smiled warmly, kneeling to give Buddy a gentle pat. "What a handsome boy," she said, her tone kind. "Anything for him while you order?" Chris chuckled. "A steak, if you've got one," he joked, before ordering a coffee and a sandwich for himself. Maggie laughed, promising to check with the kitchen. She disappeared inside, leaving Chris to his thoughts. Buddy seemed content, his eyes half closed as he basked in the warmth of the afternoon. Chris felt a pang of affection for the dog, marveling at how quickly they had bonded. He couldn't help but think about the upcoming scenes they would shoot together, scenes that demanded trust and coordination. This walk, he realized, wasn't just a break, it was laying the foundation for their partnership. Just as Chris was about to take a sip of his coffee, the peaceful moment was shattered. A burly man in a leather vest walked past their table, his face twisted in a sneer. "Filthy animals," the man muttered, loud enough for Chris to hear. "Sitting at tables like they're people." Before Chris could react, the man's boot lashed out, striking Buddy in the side. The dog let out a sharp yelp, followed by distressed barking that drew the attention of everyone on the patio. Chris sprang to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the pavement. His muscles tensed as he positioned himself protectively between Buddy and the man. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Chris demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man smirked, clearly unfazed. "Control your beast," he said dismissively. "How dare it show its teeth to a man?" Chris's hands balled into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. He glanced down at Buddy, who was now panting heavily, his distress evident. The dog's condition took precedence over his anger. "Get out of here," Chris said through gritted teeth. The man hesitated for a moment, then spat on the ground before walking away. Chris crouched down, his hands gently stroking Buddy's fur. "It's okay, boy," he murmured, though his heart was racing. But Buddy's distress only worsened. The dog began choking, his body heaving as he tried to expel something from his throat. Panic surged through Chris as he realized what was happening. "Maggie," he called out, his voice tight with urgency. "I need water now." Maggie rushed over with a bottle of water, her face pale. Chris carefully tilted Buddy's head back, pouring a small amount of water into his mouth. For a moment, it seemed to help. But then Buddy collapsed onto his side, his breathing shallow and labored. Chris's mind raced. This was no accident. The man must have poisoned Buddy. Ignoring the stunned silence around him, Chris scooped the dog into his arms, his adrenaline overriding the weight of the pit bull. "Where's the nearest vet?" he asked, his voice trembling. 3 blocks down. Left at the intersection," Maggie said quickly. "Brooklyn Animal Hospital." Without another word, Chris took off, Buddy cradled tightly against him. Each step felt heavier than the last as he raced through the streets, his only thought being to save the dog that had come to mean so much to him. The peaceful walk had turned into a life-or-death struggle, and Chris knew every second counted. Chris's heart pounded as he sprinted through the streets of Brooklyn Heights, Buddy cradled tightly in his arms. The dog's limp body was heavy, but Chris didn't falter. Passers-by turned their heads, some stepping aside in surprise as he rushed past. But Chris barely noticed them. His mind was consumed by a singular thought: getting Buddy to safety. The directions Maggie had given him echoed in his head. 3 blocks down. Left at the intersection. The weight of Buddy's condition pressed down on him, not just physically but emotionally. The dog, who had been so full of life just moments ago, now lay motionless except for the faint, labored rise and fall of his chest. Finally, the veterinary clinic came into view, a white building with a blue cross sign above the entrance. It was a beacon of hope in what felt like an endless nightmare. Chris pushed through the doors, his voice breaking as he called out, "I need help. My dog's been poisoned." The staff sprang into action immediately. A woman in scrubs, her name tag reading Dr. Harper, rushed over with a stretcher. "Put him here," she instructed, her tone calm but firm. Chris gently laid Buddy down, his hands lingering on the dog's fur for a moment before stepping back to allow the team to work. "What happened?" Dr. Harper asked as she began examining Buddy. Her movements were quick, methodical, and precise. Chris struggled to keep his voice steady. "We were at a cafe. Someone fed him something, probably laced with poison." He started choking. And then, his words trailed off as his throat tightened. Dr. Harper nodded, her brow furrowing. "We'll do everything we can. It looks like he's ingested a toxic substance, but we won't know exactly what until we run some tests. For now, we'll stabilize him with fluids and activated charcoal to neutralize the poison." As the medical team wheeled Buddy into the treatment area, Chris was ushered into the waiting room. The bright, sterile environment did little to soothe his nerves. His hands trembled as he sat down, the adrenaline beginning to wear off and the weight of the situation fully settling in. He pulled out his phone and dialed the director's number. The call was brief, Chris explaining the situation as succinctly as he could. There was a moment of silence on the other end before the director spoke, his tone shifting from frustration to concern. "Don't worry about the shoot, Chris. Just focus on Buddy. Keep me updated." Ending the call, Chris leaned back in his chair, his head resting against the wall. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Other pet owners came and went, their hushed conversations blending into the background noise. Chris's mind, however, was elsewhere, flashing back to the cafe, the man's sneer, and Buddy's anguished cries. He clenched his fists. This wasn't just an accident. It was deliberate, cruel, and entirely unforgivable. Chris felt anger simmering beneath the surface, but he forced himself to stay composed. Justice would come, but right now, his focus had to remain on Buddy. Finally, after what felt like hours, Dr. Harper emerged. Her expression was serious but not grim, which Chris took as a hopeful sign. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, sitting beside him, "Buddy is stable for now, but he's not out of the woods yet." Chris leaned forward, his heart racing. "What does that mean? Is he going to be okay?" Dr. Harper nodded slowly. We've administered the necessary treatments to counteract the poison. His vitals are improving, but we'll need to monitor him closely for the next 24 hours. It was a potent mix of narcotics and chemicals, likely rat poison. Without quick intervention, he wouldn't have made it. Chris exhaled. The weight of her words both a relief and a reminder of how close they had come to losing Buddy. Thank you, Doctor, he said, his voice soft. Whatever he needs, I'll cover it. Dr. Harper placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He's in good hands. We'll do everything we can. As Buddy rested in the recovery area, Chris couldn't shake the memory of the biker who had fed him the poisoned food. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, the sneer, the muttered insult, the deliberate act of cruelty. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chris knew he had to do more than just ensure Buddy's recovery. He had to make sure the man responsible faced justice. As Chris sat in the waiting room of the veterinary clinic, his mind churned with anger and determination. Buddy was in stable condition. But the fight wasn't over. Someone had poisoned his dog, a deliberate and malicious act, and Chris wasn't going to let it go unpunished. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number of an old friend. Sheriff Hank Morrison. Hank wasn't just a sheriff, he was someone Chris trusted to handle situations with professionalism and discretion. As the line connected, Chris took a deep breath. Hank, he began, his voice low but steady. I need your help. What's going on? Chris. Hank's voice carried concern. Even over the phone. Chris quickly recounted the day's events. From the hostile encounter at Steel Haven to the poisoning at the cafe. He described the man who had kicked Buddy and the insignia on his leather vest, a snarling tiger with extended claws. Hank listened intently, his tone growing more serious with every detail. This isn't just about Buddy, Chris said. These guys are dangerous. They're intimidating the neighborhood and putting everyone at risk. Hank was silent for a moment before responding. All right, Chris. Stay where you are. Don't confront them. I'll send a team to investigate Steel Haven. We'll handle this. Chris nodded. Even though Hank couldn't see him. Thanks, Hank. Just make sure it's thorough. These people need to be stopped. After hanging up, Chris sat back, the tension in his chest easing slightly. He trusted Hank to handle the situation. But a part of him wanted to be there to see justice served. He decided to stay near the clinic for Buddy's sake. But his thoughts were already racing ahead to what might unfold at the biker bar. Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, at Steel Haven, the atmosphere was as charged as ever. The bikers lounged outside, their boisterous laughter echoing through the street. Inside, the mood was more sinister. Groups huddled over drinks, their conversations punctuated by sharp glances toward the door. They had no idea what was coming. The sound of sirens broke through the din, and within moments, police vehicles surrounded the bar. Officers moved quickly and efficiently, entering the building with practiced precision. The bikers barely had time to react. Tables were overturned, patrons were corralled, and a search of the premises began. Outside, Hank arrived on the scene, his presence commanding respect. He oversaw the operation as officers secured evidence and began making arrests. Among the bikers was the man Chris had described, the one who had harmed Buddy. He was cuffed and led outside, his sneer replaced by a scowl. Chris received a call from Hank shortly after. We've got them, Hank said, his tone firm. Found enough evidence to link them to illegal activity. And the guy you mentioned? He's in custody. Relief flooded through Chris. Thanks, Hank. I owe you. You don't owe me anything, Hank replied. This was the right thing to do. As Chris ended the call, He felt a sense of closure beginning to settle. Justice had been served. But his focus now shifted back to Buddy. The day wasn't over yet. And his loyal companion still needed him. Chris stepped out of the clinic. The cool evening air brushing against his face as he left behind the tension of the waiting room. He had just spoken with Dr. Harper, who assured him that Buddy was showing signs of improvement. For the first time that day, Chris allowed himself to exhale deeply. Justice had been served. The man responsible for Buddy's suffering was in custody, and the dog he had grown so fond of was on the mend. But Chris's mind was far from at ease. The events of the day had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Buddy's whimpering and collapse replayed in his mind like a scene from a film he couldn't stop watching. He couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. Had he been too casual about the dangers outside the cafe? Had he underestimated the malice of a man who would kick a defenseless dog for no reason? The thought made his stomach turn. As he made his way back to the hotel, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Hank Morrison. Operation successful. All suspects in custody. Evidence secured. Your involvement remains confidential. Well done, Chris. Chris allowed himself a small smile. He appreciated Hank's efficiency and discretion. The community of Brooklyn Heights could breathe easier now, knowing the threat posed by the gang at Steel Haven had been neutralized. The bar would be shut down, and the bikers would face the consequences of their actions. Not just for Buddy, but for the countless others they had intimidated. Arriving at his hotel room, Chris collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with him. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anger, relief, and now he felt the weight of it all pressing down. He stared at the ceiling, his thoughts drifting back to Buddy. The bond they had formed in such a short time felt profound, almost inexplicable. Buddy had become more than a co-star, he was a friend. A loyal companion who deserved all the love and care Chris could offer. The next morning, Chris was back at the clinic as promised. Dr. Harper greeted him with a smile, her demeanor warm but professional. Buddy's made excellent progress overnight, she said, leading Chris to the recovery area. He's still a little weak, but he's responding well to the treatments. You can take him home today, as long as you follow the care instructions. Chris felt a surge of relief as he saw Buddy, his tail wagging weakly but enthusiastically. Kneeling beside him, Chris gently scratched behind his ears. Hey, Buddy, he said softly. Ready to go home? The dog licked his hand, a gesture that melted away the remnants of Chris's anxiety. As they walked out of the clinic together, Buddy by his side, Chris felt a renewed sense of purpose. The day had been harrowing, but it had also reminded him of the importance of standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Their bond, forged through adversity, was unshakable now. And as they headed back to the set, Chris knew one thing for certain: their story wasn't just about a film anymore. It was about trust, loyalty, and the quiet, powerful way that love, whether between humans or animals, could overcome even the darkest moments. The chapter was closing, but the lessons would remain. Together, Chris and Buddy were ready for whatever came next.